I am honored to introduce a Vietnam vet, an American hero. When I saw he had 2 silver stars, I said, Ed, for crying out loud, why did you do it twice? He said, you do what you got to do. And 70-71 was easy in Vietnam. Let Ed talk to you. 71-72 as an advisor to a South Vietnamese airborne division was not easy. It was a tough, tough time. I rode back 3 months ago with Ed from here, and he told me about some of his fighting, and I said, I'm glad I was there early. Nevertheless, Ed retired as an Army colonel. Good time for him to be speaking on the Army birthday. He is battalion and brigade level infantryman. He's my kind of a guy. And before I bring Ed up, I told you I miss you folks. Well, next month I'm coming back because I'm bringing another one of my authors, who you will want to listen to. She's better looking than Ed. We have Lou Eisenbrandt, who was a Vietnam nurse in 1969 up in I Corps, and she will be here next month talking about her experiences. Ed DeVos, come up and tell us about Kings Mountain. I forgot one thing. Sunday is what? Father's Day. Buy your own Father's Day present. Go home and tell Mama I've already taken care of it for you. I'll be selling books back there. And if you've got a son who is a father, buy him one too.
Thanks, sir. Well, thank you all for letting me be here today. As Bob mentioned, we've got several books back there. I write historical novels at this point in time, Christian historical novels. The first book was about the Centurion at the Cross. The second book is a World War II book about the 307th Bomb Group making the first daylight attack on Truck Island. My father was on the mission, but he never talked about it. And so from kind of piecing together his flight record after he died, then that became the part of the book. And the third book has been mentioned as Revenge at Kings Mountain. How many of y'all know where Kings Mountain is? Okay. How many have been to Kings Mountain? Okay, the hands get smaller. One of the things I'd encourage you to do is after this time together, go see Kings Mountain. Go there. If you've been to Arlington, if you've been to Gettysburg, Kings Mountain will be the same thing. It'll be the kind of place when you know what happened there, you look at that and just kind of go, wow. Because the men who fought there live and die in you today. And in all the people that have gone before us as well. It's just part of our legacy, is Kings Mountain. As we talk about that, I guess one more thing I would say is that the kind of thing I write about are men who have strength and courage and valor and integrity. Not words that are heard very much in our society today, but that's what we try and put into those books. So, Kings Mountain. It's now 1780 in South Carolina. Those guys back there at the table, at the back there, they're in Charlestown, not Charleston, Charlestown. Okay? That's the Atlantic Ocean over there. That's Georgia. Y'all are in the middle of South Carolina. This will be Charlotte. This will be Charlotte right over here. This will be Kings Mountain. How big is Charlotte in 1780? About 20 buildings, 2 roads, and that's Charlotte. Okay? Distance between Kings Mountain, Charlotte, about 30 miles. Okay? May of 1780. May 1780. Cornwallis takes Charleston. There's been a battle there. He has cut off the American force there. 5,000, wrap your kind of arms around it a minute, 5,000 American soldiers surrender in Charlestown in May of 1780. For those of you that grew up learning about the Revolution up north, most of those books talked about Concord, they talked about Saratoga, they talked about Valley Forge, and those things kind of ended around 1780. The next paragraph says Yorktown happened in 1781. Those 3 years happened here in South Carolina, in Georgia, in North Carolina. This is where the war was. As you'll see in just a second, this was a civil war before there was this thing called a civil war. After Cornwallis takes Charlestown, his next object really is to go after Charlotte. The grand British plan in 1780 is for Cornwallis to take his forces, march through the town of Camden, which would be right about at that table right there, go through Camden to Charlotte, then keep on going north through Virginia, link up with Clinton's army in New York, combine the two armies, and go after George Washington. Revolution's over. That's the grand plan. What Cornwallis doesn't understand is what's going on here in the middle of South Carolina. Look around to your left and right to you. I want you to look at the guy on your left. He's a rebel. He's a rebel. The guy on your right is a loyalist. The guy across the table from you doesn't care. Doesn't care. South Carolina in those times, 1/3 were rebels, 1/3 were for the loyalists, 1/3 just leave me alone. And so that's what's going on in South Carolina. Now imagine, if you will, you're a patriot, you're a rebel. The two loyalists, this loyalist over here gets together with that loyalist. Those two loyalists burn your barn. What are you going to do? Burn his barn. That's right. You're going to get a couple of your friends, you're going to go burn his barn. And you're going to probably ravage his women and kill his cows at the same time. Then he's going to get 4 or 5 guys and go after you. And this is going on all over the place in the middle of South Carolina. Who are the people that are, who's the highway patrol or the policeman? There aren't any. It's your rifle. It's your weapon. You are your own guy. You are your own guy. So think of it that way. A brief story, a guy named, I met somebody a little while ago who knows, has a relative of Newberry County in South Carolina. A guy named Teague. One day in June of 1780, 8 of Teague's friends, neighbors, I'll call them neighbors, surrounded Teague and said, "Teague, are you still a patriot?" Teague said, "Yes, I am." With another word, they took him to that tree over there and hung him. Within a week, 3 of Teague's sons found 7 of those 8 loyalists and hung them. And that's what's going on in this whole state of South Carolina. Cornwallis down there in Charlestown really doesn't understand. He knows there's some things kind of going on, but as far as what the real concern is, he hasn't really figured that out yet. In August, he moves from Charlestown up to Camden. Meets an American army going south. Cornwallis' army comes together. Cornwallis' army was about 2,500 guys. American army, about 4,500 guys. Cornwallis wins. One-day battle. The Americans flee. Cornwallis now pretty much owns the state of South Carolina in his mind. Again, there's still a lot of rabble out here that's going on. He then begins to think in terms of, okay, I need to move towards Charlotte. He begins that move around the first part of September 1780. His concern is this flank over here. What can those guys across the mountains do? They're called over-the-mountain men. The over-the-mountain guys are sitting over there in what is now current-day Tennessee. Cornwallis assigns that task to an officer named Ferguson. Ferguson is to protect this flank. He's got about 1,500 loyalists with him. Think of kind of National Guard militia that are in that band. How many of you have been to Lake Lure? In that area. That's where Ferguson is. A little bit east of there, but that's generally the area. So he is there to really stop anybody from coming across those mountains. When he gets there, he sends a note across the mountains. Sends it to a guy named Isaac Shelby. Now think about that name for just a second. Shelby, North Carolina. Comes from Isaac Shelby. The note to Shelby says, if you come across those mountains, I'm going to kill you. Now what do you think the good old mountain boys are going to do? Just maybe, you know. Obviously, yeah. Their question is their pride. They're going to come across those mountains. Shelby then goes to talk to his good friend John Sevier. Think of Sevierville, Tennessee, over the mountains. They talked to some guys in Virginia, and by the 25th of September, they have gathered a force of about 1,500 guys on the other side of the mountains, near Elizabethtown, Tennessee, a place called Sycamore Shoals. The morning of the 25th, they begin to come across those mountains. How long do you think it will take them to get across the Smoky Mountains? How long would it take you to get across the Smoky Mountains?
Too long.
5 days. 5 days. 5 days. Then they're on the east side of the mountains. They are then met with some other rebel units. One was headed by a guy named Cleveland. So if you think of Cleveland County, okay, that's where that name comes. Another unit is commanded by a guy named Joseph Winston. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So again, when you look back in the history of North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, you'll begin to see some of these names that come from the Revolutionary times. Those guys now are all meeting in, you're very close to Marion, North Carolina. Two men from Severe's unit have actually decided to give up the ghost, and they have come across the mountains already. They have turned traitor, and they tell Ferguson, hey, you've got some guys coming after you. So all of a sudden, Ferguson's kind of going, these guys are going to come. And he begins to back up from Lake Lure, goes south, eventually through Cowpens, and then over to Kings Mountain. He is there by the 6th of October, late afternoon, Kings Mountain. Those of you that have been to Kings Mountain, what does that look like? When we say it's a mountain, is it a mountain? It's kind of a big hill, pretty steep, a lot of rocks. In some places it may be 60, 70, 80 feet up, but there's kind of a saddle up on top there, but it's a pretty good rock, but not a mountain as we would think of it today. Ferguson's up on top of there. He has sent messengers from where Kings Mountain is over to Charlotte. The messengers do not get through. What's happening in Charlotte, you've got this whole area with a lot of rebel activity, and they've kind of hemmed in Cornwallis in Charlotte. What is the name of the Charlotte basketball team? The Hornets. Why? Cornwallis in 1780 said this place is like a pack of hornets. That's where the name comes from. So he couldn't get messengers out. Ferguson cannot get messengers in. Ferguson's saying, I need some reinforcements. Cornwallis has no idea. 30 miles apart. Nevertheless, Ferguson gets up on top of the mountain. He thinks that because of the number of guys he's got there, about 1,000, that basically, and he makes a statement, even God couldn't push me off the mountain. Now, that's typically not a good thing to say. Because what he doesn't know is also on the 6th of October, the rebel forces have gathered in Cowpens. Cowpens is 30 miles away from Kings Mountain. They've got a lot of horses that are kind of getting lame, so they decide, okay, we're going to send 900 guys on the best horses we've got, and we're going to go find this guy Ferguson. They had a pretty good fix on him as far as Kings Mountain. They leave the Cowpens area about 7 o'clock at night, Friday night, the 6th of October. It's raining, it's stormy, lightning flashing. As they make this move, they've got units that are lost. They kind of have stopped, police them up, keep going. You all know what that's kind of like. They eventually get to about 30 minutes away from Kings Mountain early in the afternoon of the 7th of October. The battle plan is essentially this. Guys, we're going to send these different units around the mountain, and we're just going to go up and away we go. Now think about that in terms of communications. No radios, no semaphore flags, no nothing. But basically, men, each of you acts like your own general. You know what you got to do. Go get them. So they make this, they encircle the mountain. What are these guys armed with? What are these patriots armed with? Long rifles. Long rifles, Kentucky long rifles. How many rounds can you get off in a minute? One. Very accurate weapon, out to about 200, 250 meters, but by the time to reload that thing, it's going to take even the best marksman a good 45 seconds to a minute to reload. But that's what we are armed with if we are the patriots at the bottom of Kings Mountain. On top of Kings Mountain, the Loyalists, however, are armed with what's called the Brown Bess. Brown Bess has a range of about 75 meters, can be reloaded about every 30 seconds or so. The major advantage with the Brown Bess, now think about you infantry guys, bayonet about this long. Now go back to your time at Fort Benning when you went through the infantry training as far as the bayonet assault course. In the spirit of the bayonet, to kill, to kill. That's what the British Loyalists were trained to do, is to use that bayonet. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Patriots at the bottom of the hill start to go up. They fire the first round and start to go up the hill. The Loyalists on top of the mountain charge down with fixed bayonets. Now, what are you going to do if you have fired your one round and you're in the process of reloading and you're halfway up the mountain and all of a sudden you see this bayonet charge coming? You're going to run. And they did. The Patriots ran back down to the bottom. Kind of got reorganized, then did it a second time. Shot a round off, started, charge came back down. By the third time this came along, they had shot up enough of the Loyalists on top of the mountains, they were able to get up on top of the mountain. And because now you've got all these Loyalist units now really surrounding the top of the mountain, you've just got this big old noose just getting closer and closer and closer. The commander, Ferguson, tries to break out. He and 2 other officers get on their horses. They try and make a dash through the lines. there are at least 25 patriots who remember shooting the 13 shots that Ferguson was shot with. Because everybody said they got him. He died right there on the spot. As soon as that happened, the flag of surrender went up by the senior British officer. But that's when it gets very interesting. Because now you've got all these patriot soldiers surrounding these loyalists. Some of these guys knew each other from past years. They'd been living in the same areas. And all of a sudden, what would you do if the guy, you had him right there, this was the guy who burned your barn. This was the guy who ravaged your wife. What would you do? And the answer is we killed them, about 150 to 200 of them, right there on top of the mountain, until cooler heads prevailed and just kind of went time out. And even at that, they still took 700 prisoners. Cornwallis, again, over in Charlotte, still has no idea what's going on, and will not find out for 3 more days. The Patriots then take those prisoners and start moving north to get out of the battlefield the next day. The importance of Kings Mountain really is it's the turning point of the Revolution. Because what happens is as soon as Cornwallis in Charlotte finds out he's lost his flank, he then retreats back into South Carolina to winter there, and all the momentum to go through North Carolina to link up with the guys in New York is gone. And that's where the war turns. Because 1 year after Kings Mountain is what? Yorktown. Yorktown. So that's why we call it that. The book we've entitled Revenge at Kings Mountain, because again, we try and put you in a state where you're one of these guys who's got this guy right here. And what do you do? And what do you do? Before we entertain some questions, let me give you some thoughts here about some of these men, because they are our heritage. I mentioned Over the Mountain Trail. The Over the Mountain Trail still exists today. It is part of the National Park Service. The park ranger actually at Kings Mountain is in charge of Kings Mountain, Cowpens, 96, and the Over the Mountain Trail to maintain that. Every year on the 25th of September, people gather at Sycamore Shoals and they begin that walk over the mountain just like their forefathers. And they make it over to Kings Mountain by the 7th of October. As they do that, they educate school children about the Revolution. So if you're looking for a nice hike someday, you may want to talk to the Over the Mountain boys, called the Over the Mountain Trail. Let me give you some thoughts here about some people that fought in this battle. Let's assume for just a second that you were in the battle, you're a patriot, you're wounded, you lost your leg. You're taken, as the battle is completed, some people that lived near the battlefield took you and they nursed you for as best they could for a little while. You're from Virginia. Your wife eventually hears that you have been wounded and you're back there in South Carolina. She comes over the mountains. Now imagine now it's about winter of 1780. No interstates, no whatever. This lady comes across those mountains, finds you, nurses you back to health, takes you back over the mountains, and that's where you lived happily ever after. So that's what some of these people did. Think about it also from the standpoint, let's say these two gentlemen here are brothers. They are loyalists. They're fighting at Kings Mountain. These two gentlemen are patriots. How would you like to have a battle where you're fighting against your brother? Because that's what happened there. Because you had families that had loyalist leanings, patriot leanings under the same household. For this set of brothers here, these two and those two, they lived through the battle. Over here you had 4 other brothers, one a patriot, he was the oldest brother, 3 loyalists. They all died that day. Every one of them. The patriot's wife actually found her husband at the battlefield. She carried him back to their home and buried him in their farmhouse, at their farmhouse, outside the farmhouse. So, think about also a guy, let's say you are a patriot. You have fought with Sevier, you have fought with Shelby. You're a good guy. Your father is a loyalist. And just before the Battle of Kings Mountain, your father sees you. He says, son, I want you to fight with me in this next battle that's coming up. What would you do? In this case, the son said, okay, Dad, I'll fight with you. So the son fought with the father, shot at some of the same guys he'd fought with before. At the end of the battle, the father was killed. The son lived. When Shelby and Sevier talked to him after the battle, they wanted to get the story. What happened here? And the kid told them the story. And that gentleman was taken back into the Patriot Army, and like the rest of his brothers, in 1832, he received a pension for serving our country. So it's kind of interesting. Again, father against son, brother against brother. That was what's going on. That's the Civil War part of it. Some of you in Vietnam, if you were a district senior advisor or a province guy, you saw that kind of thing. You saw that. And so you know exactly what I'm speaking about there. Think about another guy who is at the Battle of Waxhaw, which took place in May of 1780. He took 23 saber wounds. He was one of those people at the Waxhaw who was overcome by Tarleton's force, who showed no mercy. 23 saber wounds. His left arm was cut off. Okay. Later on, he becomes a lawyer. I still have not figured out how he did this, but he took a steel ball and somehow wrapped it around his wrist and tied it there. So he had that was part of his what he had for the rest of his life was a steel ball. But I can always think of him when all of a sudden he's in the courtroom trying to make a point, and he would take that steel ball and bang it on the table, you know. But that's the kind of people they were. I'll end with one more story and then open up for any questions that you may have. Think of your 13-year-old son. Just kind of get your picture of your 13-year-old son. 2 months before he was born, you died. Your other two sons were older than that 13-year-old son is now. The first one was killed very early in the Revolution. The second one was killed in the Battle of Charlestown. Your wife, the mother of the 13-year-old son, went to Charlestown to nurse him back to health. She basically got disease, I'm not sure what kind of disease, in Charlestown and died there. The son also died there. So now your 13-year-old son is essentially by himself. Dad's dead, mother's dead, both brothers dead. He becomes a runner for the American forces in the South Carolina area in late 1780, early 1781. He's captured by a British officer. The British officer says, "Shine my boots." The kid says, "I ain't gonna do that." British officer took a sword and went whack. And from whenever you see that picture of that guy, from then on, you'll see this scar on his head. His name is Andrew Jackson. He's your 7th president of the United States. So that's the kind of people, again, that we come from. That's the stock that we come from. And what questions can I answer for you? What questions can I answer? Yes, sir.
Where was Francis Marion?
Francis Marion. Okay, here's South Carolina. Francis is over there by Georgetown. He's kind of harassing some of the guys that are going back and forth between when Cornwallis is up here in Charlotte. Camden's a pretty good sized town. The next big town would be Charlestown. Francis Marion is basically interdicting all those supply lines back and forth in the middle of South Carolina. Definitely a study in terms of that kind of warfare. Yep. Yes, sir.
My recollection of Kings Mountain, I've only seen it from 85, is that it's more up than side.
Oh yeah, it's like this.
How did they assault that? Just climb the steep?
Just climbed it. Put one foot in front of the other. All you infantry guys know what I'm talking about. Just put one foot in front of the other and away we go. A lot of rocks to hide behind, fortunately, but still not a really good place. But thank you. Other questions? Well, this is easy. This is an easy group. All right. Yes, sir.
Off the subject, I understand you were in Vietnam, were you not?
Yeah.
An officer with airborne?
Vietnamese infantry, yep. And that was in 1972 when the NVA attacked. Those of you who may have some recollection, if you were there in 1972, you remember that the NVA attacked through a number of different places, but I was one of the guys trapped just south of Anlock in 72. I hate to admit it to my Air Force brethren, but I live here today because of Air Force airplanes, but that's just the way it is. I have a very good friend who's an Air Force chaplain, and he harasses me all the time, and I try and ignore that. But yeah, that was a very difficult time for us.
You speak Vietnamese?
I do. Not very well. I can get a beer. But and actually, I'm asked this several different times about what did you eat? Well, I ate Vietnamese food the entire time. What saved me though was that my counterpart liked Hennessy cognac. So every night we would take a shot of Hennessy cognac, and that would kill most of the crap that was down in here. My wife to this day does not know what I ate because it just wouldn't be her thing. But thank you. Yes, sir.
What was your inspiration for your interest into the Battle of Vietnam? I know you.
Good question. Yep.
You talked about the spirit of the people.
Yep. When one of my assignments on the mid-'70s, I taught ROTC at Furman up in Greenville, South Carolina, and my job was to, as the MS3 instructor, was to get guys ready to go to summer camp at Fort Bragg, and so we were in the pre-commissioning phase. And so I was trying to keep it as interesting as I could for these guys and really kind of wet their whistle in terms of what this is all about. And so I'd put sand tables out there. I'd take them on terrain walks, take them to cow pens, take them to places like that, just so they could see what we're really talking about. And that really was the start of that. As far as writing the books, the short story is after I retired, I was working for a financial planning firm. I was in El Paso, Texas. Our church had basically a 6-week class on the care of aging parents. Our parents were not of that age yet, but we knew they were going to be at some point in time. But I came away from that thinking, okay, as I get older, what can I do to breathe that can still contribute to society? And I figured as long as these worked a little bit and this worked a little bit, maybe I could write. Because you can always change the writing, you know. But so I started with that. And then the first book was really the centurion at the cross, because I kept wondering about this centurion. How could the centurion at the cross say, surely this was the Son of God? And I kept working at that. And at one time, I actually put the book down because I thought, who's going to read this? I'm just a dumb old infantry guy, certainly not chaplain. Put the book down, started working on Kings Mountain, as a matter of fact. Was at Kings Mountain, talking to the South Carolina expert of Kings Mountain, a guy named Bobby Moss, who died about a year or so ago. Dr. Moss said, as we were talking, he said, you know, I was a minister one day. And I said, okay, didn't know that. He says, yeah, and my last sermon was about the centurion at the cross. And I said, would you say that one more time? And I kind of went back and told my wife the story, and she said, well, I guess that means you need to finish that book up, doesn't it? So I put Kings Mountain down, but yes, sir.
The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong fought against us with ferocious commitment. What motivated them to fight us so?
Oh, good question. I think all of us probably have our own thought of that to one degree or the other. I'm not sure that I can answer that to any degree of certainty from just, you know, that would certainly cover all the territory, but I think they just had a belief in their country. More than the South Vietnamese, I'm not sure. I'm asked sometimes about how were the South Vietnamese soldiers. My answer typically is, well, when we were surrounded, we were pretty good. Until then, if we gave our guys a place to run, they would probably find a way to run. But if we were surrounded, we stood pretty tall. But I'm not sure that really answers your question, because again, it's how their philosophy was, and the South Vietnamese were talking to two different groups of people in some respects. Certainly both those countries had been at war many, many years before I got there in 1971. I think that played into it as well. So, but I'm sure others can certainly contribute to that answer better than mine. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Revolutionary War activity in Georgia. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, you need to go to Washington, Georgia, and talk to the guys at Kettle Creek. There are not as many battles in Georgia, but there are some. There's Kettle Creek, there's Augusta. There are some places that are kind of out there that you really have to kind of know particular people to do that. I live actually very close to Elijah Clark State Park. Elijah Clark was one of the heroes of the Georgia time in the Revolution, but there are other guys like him. There were in fact 30 guys from the Georgia group who fought at Kings Mountain with all the rest of the people I spoke of before. Yes, sir.
Do you think that our society today has lost its appreciation for the history of our country?
Absolutely, without question. Which is why I do what I do. As I've told other people before, is what I view my job is not to change history. I can't change history and don't want to. All I'm trying to do is make it breathe. I'm trying to tell the story factually. I'm trying to tell it the way it happened. I may rub your nose into it because you thought some guy was a hero, but he's really not. But I'm going to tell you just like the history books say, and I'm going to double check all that to make sure it's right. And I'm going to make that dialogue fit into what actually happened. But yes, sir, that's one of my driving forces, is to put those books into the hands of people that will cause them to kind of go, whoa, what's this? And quite frankly, one of the greatest satisfactions I receive are when people give me a call or email and say, we read that book and we couldn't put it down. I had one lady call me up one day and says, you're the reason I'm not getting my house clean. I said, excuse me? She said, yes, I can't put your book down. I thought that was a good thing. So you've got these kind of things that people, I think, are yearning for that in many respects. I think many of us, of course, because our fathers, our uncles were in World War II, in many cases they didn't say anything about what happened. Which is why the World War II book I have over there is to really get at that, because as you all have had the experience, if you talk to people who are, let's say, in their 80s, who fought it in World War II or Korea, many of them will talk to you because you've had similar experiences. They will tell you stories that nobody else knows. Their wife doesn't know, their children don't know, because they'll talk to you because you have a shared experience. And I would encourage you to do that. When you see the older veterans than us, just start talking to them. You know, where did you fight? Where were you? And they will tell you stuff that nobody else in the world knows. And it really is a great thing, a great outlet for them. At the same time, I would also suggest to you, as far as writing, go back in your library and look at all the books you've got in the library. My question to you is, how many of those authors are dead? And the answer is most of them. But before they died, they left us something that we can continue to look at and read and ponder over and study. So if you've got some things that you think are useful to your family, you have some things that you just think people might want to know, your history of units, history, just lessons learned. If you don't write those down before you die, they're gone. Pictures are nice, but those letters or those words are going to stand forever. Because some of those books you have in your library have been there for several hundred years, written a long time ago. But I think that's kind of a way of getting back at history. We just need to keep banging away at it. My fourth book, which we're in the process of doing, and probably about 30 or 40% finished, is a World War II book about 5 men, 5 brothers, all fictional, and it's the fact they're in one family. But these are all men who I have interviewed, or I know about, I know their story, I know what happened to them, and I'm bringing those all together into one family. The purpose of that book really is to kind of get at what you're asking there in terms of letting people know that some of us, many in this room certainly, we come from a family who runs to the guns. But there are a lot of families in this country whose families have no idea what we're talking about. And so I'm trying to write a book that basically says to all of us that we're part of these families that runs to the guns. And those that have not had that experience, if that puts them on a guilt trip, I'm okay with that. Because they need to have an appreciation for what you did, your fathers did, your sons are doing. So that's why I do that. Yes, sir.
I've made several presentations at middle schools and high schools. I found out that the children were hungry for this knowledge about military history, about Vietnam, and some of the teachers don't even know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Do you find that possible?
Absolutely. This is, since the Kings Mountain book came out in, what, Bob, September, whatever it was. This is the 32nd time I've spoken about Kings Mountain. Everywhere from SAR groups to DAR groups to MOAAs to church groups to schools to you name it. And I've never found people that kind of go, we didn't even know about that. So I agree with you. There are people that just, and I think that it's incumbent then upon all of us who do have this history to just not hold it back. Now I realize there are going to be some stories that, again, people are not going to need to know. They're not going to be able to understand. And I'm not talking about those stories. I'm talking about things that you can kind of get at a little bit on the edges. Because there are some things that happened in your life and in mine that they don't come out real easy. And nor do I think should they.
We got time for one more question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You're at the Battle of An Loc Men. Were you there when the Russian tanks showed up? And if so, how did you react to those?
Not well. I was actually at a place called Ton Kai, which is about 10 clicks south of An Loc. The short story is that we set up, this is kind of crazy, but the bad guys had surrounded An Loc. And so our job was to go into the village of Ton Kai, set up a fire base. Sounds pretty good. Except that the infantry unit that I was with, the Vietnamese, we went through the swamp to get to Ton Kai because we couldn't go on the road, so we kind of infiltrated through the night. The next morning, sky cranes. 3 sky cranes came in to bring the artillery tubes in. Now, I'm not real smart, and the North Vietnamese are pretty smart. They kind of figured out what was going on. Within approximately 3 or 4 hours, we were lambasted with more artillery than I can even consider as they blew away artillery tubes. To get at your question is because we were so kind of isolated, we knew that there were tanks up north. We did not know much about them, but we had heard that there were tanks. What we did not know was that there were APCs that the Vietnamese, that the ARVNs had, that were also up there. The middle of the first night, all of a sudden we hear these tanks rolling down the road. Or, I won't say tanks, I'll show you, we hear these treads coming down the road. We hear this machinery coming down the road. Didn't have a clue what it was. There was no communications between us and whoever. Basically, our guys just took what guns they had and could have just laid them right on the road. And the closer that thing came, the closer it came. And at some point in time, we went fire. And we blew away about 3 APCs filled with wounded because we had no idea. I never saw any tanks. I did see an SA-7 shot, but no tanks. But, yeah.
Thank you, Ed. We
Yes, sir.
appreciate
Thank
you
you.
being with us today. We have a couple of gifts for you. This is a book called AWOL that has been recommended by Senator John McCain. And also, this is kind of the main thing that we present to all of our speakers. This is, I think you would probably recognize that.
I do that.
Some people use it as a paperweight. Others use it for other things that we won't talk about.
Yep.
But we appreciate so much you coming and being with us today.
Yes, sir. Thank
and
you.
we hope you'll come back. I would also like to pick up on what he just said about if you have stories. For those of you who don't know, and most of you do know, that we have the program with the Atlanta History Center on the Living History Project, and we've got Tony Hilliard and Joe Bruckner that work with that project, and I would encourage you to please set up a time and go down and share your history